The wedding hall glittered with elegant chandeliers shimmering like stars, champagne flowing like rivers, and violins playing soft classical notes in the background. It was a day meant for perfection, the kind of day scripted in glossy magazines, promised in fairy tales, but fate was writing its own story, and it had a different ending in mind. Damon Rivers stood at the altar, his jaw set, his smile poised for photographers. At 38, he was everything society praised us: self-made millionaire, suave, successful, admired. Beside him, dressed in an expensive designer gown, was Elena, his soon-to-be bride, a stunning international model whose face had graced billboards from Manhattan to Milan. She was flawless, the kind of beauty that made strangers stop in the street and take a second look. And Damon, well, he had made sure the whole world knew she was now his. Guests whispered excitedly, snapping pictures, admiring the extravagance, the 10-tier cake, the imported orchids, the celebrity chef, even the harpist flown in from Vienna. It was the kind of wedding that made headlines, the kind of wedding no one could forget. But then the doors opened, and everything stopped. All heads turned. The music faltered. Even the cameras paused, sensing something unexpected. There, in the grand entrance of the hall, stood a woman. She wasn't wearing designer heels or diamonds. Her dress was modest, her hair pinned up simply. But it was her eye steady, unwavering, that commanded the room. She walked in slowly, and behind her, 5 small figures followed, 5 children, each one dressed neatly, their little shoes polished, their hands clutching each other nervously. But they carried something even more powerful than appearance. They carried resemblance. Not just to each other, but to Damon. Whispers turned to gasps. Damon's smile faltered, his color drained. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. The woman stopped halfway down the aisle and looked directly at him, calm, brave. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, but carried through the room like thunder. Damon, before you say I do, I think your children should have a chance to watch their father make the biggest decision of his life. A silence fell heavier than a storm. No one moved, not even the bride. This wasn't just a dramatic entrance. This was history crashing into the present like a tidal wave. Damon recognized her. How could he not? Her name was Eliza. Once upon a time, she was everything to him. Before the money, before the yachts, the fame, the $1 million deals, there was Eliza. The girl who believed in him when he had nothing. The woman who stayed up nights editing his proposals, cheering his dreams, standing by him through every rejection letter. Had shared laughter, struggle, hoped, and once, they had shared love, but he had walked away from all of it. When the offers started rolling in and his name became a brand, Damon decided to upgrade his life. Eliza didn't fit the image he wanted to project. She was real, grounded, humble, and he wanted glamour, flash, and headlines. So he left. No calls, no explanations, just a quiet vanishing. She didn't chase him. She didn't beg. He assumed she would eventually move on. He had no idea that the last time they had been together, she had carried more than memories when he left. No idea that 5 lives had come into this world because of the love they once shared. No idea that she had raised them alone, never asking for anything, never interrupting his spotlight, until today. Today, she stood at his wedding, not to ruin it, but to finally be seen. Alina blinked in confusion, gripping Damon's hand. "What's going on?" she whispered. "Who is she?" But Damon couldn't answer. He didn't know how to. His past, which he thought he had buried under layers of luxury and forgetfulness, had walked an aisle breathing and looking him straight in the eyes. And everyone was watching. Some guests murmured. Others pulled out their phones, sensing a scandal. But the children didn't seem to notice the stares. They simply looked at the man in the tuxedo like he was a puzzle they didn't understand. The oldest boy, maybe around 7 or 8, stepped forward. His voice was soft. "Are you our dad?" The question sliced through Damon sharper than any accusation. For the first time in years, his words failed him. What could he possibly say? That he didn't know. That he never asked. That he chose? Flash over family. Elisa knelt beside her children and put an arm around the youngest, a girl who looked no older than 5, her curls bouncing with every move. "Kids," she said gently, "this is Damon. He's the man I told you about." The boy looked at Damon again, more curious than angry. "You used to love our mom." Damon opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was tight. He nodded faintly. Alina took a step back, trying to process. The room felt like a balloon ready to burst, but Eliza's tone stayed kind, even steady. "She wasn't here to destroy. She wasn't here to fight. I didn't come here to beg or accuse," she said, addressing the crowd as much as him. "I came here because I thought your children deserved to see who their father is. I didn't come for revenge. I came because I'm proud of who they are, and I want them to know where they came from, even if he chooses to pretend they don't exist." Her voice trembled only once, but even in that trembling, there was strength. She looked at Damon once more. "You left without a word, Damon. I built a life without you, a hard one, but beautiful. These 5 are the best parts of that life. And whether you choose to be part of it or not, they deserve to see you once. Just once." And with that, she turned. She didn't wait for applause, or pity, or drama. She turned to leave. The children followed, But before they reached the doors, the boy looked back. Bye, Dad. It wasn't bitter. It was hopeful. Like he still believed, somehow, that maybe his dad could become the man his mom once saw in him. And in that moment, Damon's world shifted. The gold, the glamour, the polished illusion he had built suddenly felt paper thin. A single moment, a single sentence, and 5 tiny faces. Everything he thought he knew was about to change, and the guests, who came for a wedding, would leave with a story they'd never forget. Because sometimes, life doesn't follow a perfect script. Sometimes, the greatest entrances come from those no one expected. And sometimes, love shows up not in diamonds and dresses, but in 5 little hands, reaching for the truth. Damon didn't sleep that night. The wedding had ended in whispers and stunned silences. The photographers packed up early, the violinist quietly left, and even Alina disappeared without saying goodbye. She hadn't screamed or demanded answers. She had simply stared at him for a long time, then walked out of the reception hall with her gown brushing the floor like the last note of a sad song. Now, as dawn crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his luxury penthouse, Damon sat alone on a velvet couch, still in his wedding tux. The bow tie hung loose around his neck. His glass of champagne, untouched, sat beside him now flat, lifeless. Much like the confidence he had always worn so icily, he couldn't stop seeing their faces. 5 small faces, 5 pairs of eyes, one word echoing in his mind over and over: Dad. Damon had built a career solving problems, negotiating billion-dollar deals, charming rooms full of skeptics, but he couldn't find a single word to say to that little boy who had simply wanted to know if he was their father. That boy hadn't accused. He hadn't cried. He had just hoped, and Damon didn't deserve it. He stood up, walked to the massive window, and looked down at the city below. The streets were already waking. Delivery trucks moved in and out. A father and his young daughter walked hand in hand, probably on their way to school. He realized with a jolt that he had no idea what his own children liked, what subjects they were good at, what songs they hummed at bedtime, what made them laugh. He didn't even know their names. He felt hollow, not because of lost wealth, he had more than enough, but because of what he'd missed. What he had abandoned, he didn't want to admit it aloud, not even to himself, but the truth wrapped around him tighter than regret. He had been a coward. The next morning, his assistant Rachel arrived at the office early. She found Damon already there, seated behind his mahogany desk, his fingers laced tightly, eyes fixed on nothing. Cancel everything today, he said quietly. She blinked. Even the investor call with the Tokyo team, especially that. Rachel hesitated. Damon never canceled meetings, not even when he was sick, not even when his company had nearly collapsed during a bad quarter. Are you okay, sir? She asked gently. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his drawer and pulled out a small worn photo, one he hadn't looked at in years. It was him and Eliza, taken at the beginning of it all, before the money. They were laughing, her hand on his cheek, sunlight pouring through the cheap apartment window behind them. She looked so alive then, so full of trust. He had broken that trust. He turned the photo over. Her handwriting was still there. No matter what happens, dream loud. I believe in you. He swallowed hard. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for her address. It wasn't hard. She had never hidden. She just never came looking for anything either. She had simply lived, raised 5 children, carried on in silence. That afternoon, Damon stood outside a modest yellow house with flower beds out front and chalk drawings on the sidewalk. A bicycle leaned against the porch railing. He could hear laughter through the open window, one of the children telling a story that ended in giggles. His chest tightened. He raised his hand to knock, but paused. His polished shoes looked strange against the worn wood of the steps. He wasn't sure what he expected. An apology wouldn't be enough. A gift wouldn't fix anything, but he had to try. He knocked. A moment later, the door creaked open, and there she was. Eliza. No makeup, no glamour, but still glowing with a kind of strength that made him feel smaller than he had in years. She didn't look surprised to see him, just tired. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said quietly. I wasn't sure I could, he admitted, but I couldn't forget their faces, or yours. Eliza stepped aside and let him in. The house smelled like baked apples and cinnamon. It was cozy, lived in. A few toys scattered on the floor, school drawings pinned to the fridge. It wasn't a mansion, but it felt like home. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room, uncertain, suddenly feeling like a stranger in a world that once was his. I don't expect you to explain, she said as she handed him a glass of water. But I need to, Damon said, setting the glass down, untouched. I left because I thought I was chasing something greater. I thought, if I had success, I could rewrite my life. But I didn't realize I was erasing parts of it that were real. Eliza didn't interrupt. She just watched him. I was afraid, he continued. Afraid I'd fail. Afraid I wouldn't be enough for you. Afraid that if I didn't become everything the world wanted, I'd be nothing. So I chased the world. And lost you in the process. She looked down for a moment. Her voice was soft. And the children. He looked her in the eyes. I didn't know. I swear. If I had have known, if I would have had the courage to come back even then. But I should have found out. I should have called. They ask about you sometimes, she said, but I never said a bad word. I wanted them to build their dreams on hope, not bitterness. Damon's voice cracked. Can I see them? She nodded slowly. They're at the park down the street. With my sister, I'll take you. They walked in silence. At the park, 5 children played near the swings. The same little boy who spoke at the wedding spotted them first. He ran toward Eliza, but slowed when he saw Damon. The boy studied him, as if weighing a memory with reality. Damon knelt down, meeting him eye to eye. I'm Damon, he said quietly, but I think you've been calling me Dad. The boy nodded. We waited for you. I know. I'm sorry I made you wait so long. The boy tilted his head. Are you staying now? Damon didn't rush to answer, but then he looked at Eliza, and at the 4 other kids behind the boy, each with pieces of him in their faces. I'm going to try, he said, if you'll let me. The boy's face lit up, not fully, but enough. Mom says people can change, if they really want to. Damon smiled, a real one this time. Then I hope you'll help me learn how. They walked back to the swings together, 5 little hands eventually reaching for his, hesitant at first. Then stronger. Eliza stood back, watching the moment quietly, not with triumph, but with peace. Sometimes love doesn't come back with flowers and fireworks. Sometimes it returns quietly, with regret, humility, and the hope of beginning again. And sometimes, a father finds his way home not through directions, but through 5 small hearts ready to forgive. Asterisk. The next time Damon showed up, it wasn't in a luxury car or wearing a $1,000 suit. It was raining that morning, soft and steady, the kind of rain that made the world slow down. The children were bundled at the window, watching drops race each other down the glass. They weren't expecting him, but there he was, standing at the edge of the yard, drenched, holding a box of donuts in one hand and a worn-out board game in the other. He didn't knock this time. He waited, uncertain if he was welcome. The oldest boy saw him first and called out, "He's back." Eliza wiped her hands on a towel, her breath catching. She hadn't expected him to return not so soon. Not soaked to the bone and looking like he'd run a marathon just to stand there with a cardboard box in hand. She opened the door before he could. "You're wet," she said softly. "I know," Damon replied, a sheepish grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "The forecast didn't warn me you had rain, or kids who like vanilla frosted donuts." She almost smiled. Almost. He held up the board game. "I thought maybe I could learn how to lose to them in Monopoly." The children erupted with energy, crowding the doorway, dragging him inside with muddy shoes, and questions like bullets. "Did you bring the dice? Do you know how to play? Can I be the banker? Do you really own a building with your name on it?" They didn't care about the tuxedos or the money. They cared that he came back, and he stayed that day. All day. By the time the sun peeked through the clouds, he had been wiped clean of his old world, his jacket forgotten on a chair, his hair ruffled by small fingers, his lap taken by 2 sleepy heads, as he read a bedtime story from memory. It wasn't perfect. He fumbled with rules, mispronounced cartoon names, and burned toast while trying to help in the kitchen. But it was real, and that was more than anything he'd built in the last 10 years. Later, after the kids were tucked in, and the house was quiet, Damon found himself sitting across from Eliza on the back porch. The air was fresh, the rain now a memory. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "I feel like I'm learning everything backwards." "That's parenting," she replied gently. "It's messy, but it's worth it." He looked out at the night sky, then back at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her expression didn't harden, it softened. "Because I wanted to see if you'd remember on your own. And because I was scared, not for me, for them. I didn't want them growing up knowing they weren't enough for their father to stay." Damon's heart dropped. "They are enough," he said. "They're more than enough." "Then prove it," she said quietly. "Not to me, to them." From that moment on, Damon began showing up not with fanfare or apologies, but with actions. He took them to school, sat through parent-teacher meetings, learned how to braid hair from online tutorials, showed up to Little League games with awkward cheers, and bought a pair of sneakers that got muddy more often than not. Each of the 5 children was different. Tilly, the quiet thinker who watched before speaking. Maya, the firecracker who asked 100 questions a minute. Jonah, who was obsessed with space and told everyone he would own Mars someday. Leela, the gentle one who carried a doll everywhere. And Caleb, the youngest, who refused to let go of Damon's hand the moment he held it. He memorized their favorite cereals, learned which one hated broccoli, and which one loved thunderstorms. He sat through school plays where he clapped louder than anyone, even when a costume fell off mid-performance. Still, there were stumbles. One night, Jonah asked him if he'd leave again. Damon froze. "No," he said. "Never again." Jonah tilted his head. "Promise. I swear." And he meant it. For the first time in years, Damon felt like he was becoming someone he could be proud of, not the man who bought skyscrapers, but the one who earned bedtime hugs. Weeks passed, and slowly, Eliza let herself breathe again. She had guarded her heart for so long, it felt strange to watch it soften. But she couldn't deny it. He was changing, not overnight, not with grand speeches, but with simple, quiet choices. One afternoon, as she folded laundry, she found a crayon drawing on the floor. 5 smiling kids. a big man in the middle holding their hands. The title written in clumsy handwriting, Our Dad Came Back. She sat down on the bed and wept. That night, Damon knocked on her door, not the front door, but her room. He stood there, nervous. I know I don't deserve a second chance. Not as your partner, not even as your friend. But if there's still a space in your heart, even a little one. Eliza looked at him. There was pain in her eyes, but also something else, hope. Let's not rush, she said. I'm not going anywhere, he promised. Take all the time you need. I'll still be here. And he was. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces through scraped knees, family dinners, missed alarms, and bedtime stories. Sometimes, love rebuilds itself one day at a time, and sometimes, it takes 5 tiny reasons for a man to finally remember who he was always meant to be. It had been 93 days since Damon missed a morning with the children, not a single school run, not one weekend breakfast, not even a late-night dad. I had a bad dream moment had passed without him being there. He was no longer just a name in stories or a mystery on the mantelpiece. He was real, present, changing, but not everyone believed in his transformation. At a school event called Family Day, each child had been asked to bring a parent to class. It was Maya's idea for Damon to be the speaker for her group. My dad builds big things, she'd said proudly. He can tell them how he made his company. Damon had never felt nervous before. He had delivered speeches in boardrooms filled with investors. He had presented on stages under blinding lights with stock prices hanging in the balance. But, standing in front of 30 curious second graders, knees bouncing, one hand gripping Maya's shoulder for support, he was sweating. Hi, he began, clearing his throat. I'm Damon Mayes. I'm her dad. The words felt new every time he said them. Not because they were unfamiliar, but because he never got tired of hearing himself belong. I used to think the best thing I ever built was my company, he continued, but I've learned that the best thing I'll ever build is trust. There was a pause, silence. Then a kid in the front row raised his hand. Did you build a rocket too? The room burst into giggles. Damon laughed with them, then nodded. Not yet, but my son Jonah might. By the end of the talk, parents shook his hand, teachers smiled politely, and Maya squeezed his arm like she never wanted him to leave. But outside the classroom, one figure stood apart. Alina. She hadn't reached out since the wedding. She didn't. I have to. Her silence said more than 1,000 questions could, but now she was here, leaning against a sleek black car, sunglasses perched on her head, dressed like she had just stepped out of a magazine shoot. Damon, she said coolly, blinked, caught off guard. Alina, what are you doing here? She studied him carefully. I heard you've been playing family man. I have been trying to do the right thing. For whom? She asked, a slight edge to her voice. The woman you left without a word, or the kids you didn't know existed? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. You disappeared from my life like I was a stepping stone, she said. No explanation, just gone. I know, he replied gently, and I'm sorry. Alina crossed her arms. You were supposed to marry me. We had a life planned. I had a fantasy planned, he corrected, and I dragged you into it. That wasn't fair to you. She didn't soften. So this is your redemption arc. Suburban dad, peanut butter sandwiches, school plays. Damon smiled. It's not an arc, it's a beginning. She scoffed. You always did love reinvention. No, I always feared being real. That's what I ran from, but I'm done running. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped forward and looked him in the eye. Then I hope you're not pretending, again, for their sake. And she was gone. Damon stood alone for a while, letting her words sink in, not because they were cruel, but because they held a mirror up to who he once was, and how far he still had to go. That night, Eliza found him in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes by hand, even though they had a perfectly working dishwasher. You're quiet, she said, drying a plate. I saw Alina today, he replied. Eliza didn't react, but she stilled. She asked me if I was pretending. If this, he waved around, was just another phase. What did you say? That I'm finally building something that matters? She leaned against the counter, her eyes searching his face. Do you believe that? He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. Yes, but I'm scared of what? That I won't get it right, that I'll fail them. You. Eliza nodded slowly. We all fail sometimes. The difference is whether you show up again the next day. A beat passed. Then she handed him a cup of cocoa, just like she used to when they were young and broke and planning their future with nothing but dreams. And that was the thing they had once dreamed together. Later that week, Caleb got sick. Nothing serious, but enough to send everyone into a spiral of tissues, fevers, and sleepless nights. Damon didn't leave the house for 3 days. He read stories, cleaned up throw-up, made soup that didn't taste like soup, and sang lullabies. Off-key wasn't glamorous, but it was love. One night, as he rocked Caleb in his arms, the little boy whispered something against his chest. I love you, Daddy. It was the first time he had said it. Damon didn't cry. He wept, not because of guilt, not because of regret, but because those 4 words had given him something no business deal ever had: peace. And slowly, even the other kids began trusting him more deeply. Eli started asking him questions at night. Leela insisted he braid her doll's hair. Jonah made Him promised they'd build a telescope together. Maya made him pinky swear. He'd never miss another dance recital. He'd eat in single quotes. TIDN single quotes to Hero Day. Each child had to bring someone they considered their personal hero. Damon wasn't expecting any of his kids to choose him, not yet, but all 5 did. He walked into that school wearing a paper cape Maya made from leftover wrapping paper. His heart raced faster than when he made his first $1,000,000. Eliza stood at the back of the room, watching as her children beamed with pride. For the first time, she smiled, not a small one, but the kind that reached her eyes. And Damon, across the room, saw it. It was the same smile she gave him years ago, when he promised to dream loud and never give up. He had failed her once, but maybe, just maybe, he was learning how to keep that promise now. Asterisk. The crowd stood and clapped as Jonah's telescope project was announced the winner of the school science fair. Damon was the loudest one clapping, nearly embarrassing his son with his excitement, but Jonah didn't mind. Not this time. He looked out into the audience, past his classmates, teachers, and judges, and straight to his dad. Damon gave him a thumbs up, his eyes proud and a little misty. Jonah smiled, really smiled, and, in that moment, Damon knew something had shifted. Trust wasn't being rebuilt anymore, it had taken root. But the real test wasn't applause or science fairs. It came a few days later, and it didn't announce itself with trophies or celebration. It came in the form of a letter, a thick envelope addressed to Eliza, with elegant gold lettering stamped across the top. The Andover Foundation, a prestigious scholarship board that awarded full rides to exceptional children from unique family backgrounds. Damon remembered it vaguely from a past event. He had once donated to the foundation, but never thought much of it. Eliza opened the envelope slowly, her hands trembling as she read. "You need to see this," she said, handing it to Damon. He scanned the letter, his eyes widened. "They want to document the children's story for their Impact series." Eliza nodded. "They want to film a short documentary about how they've thrived despite the circumstances, about what it means to grow up with hope. They said someone submitted an anonymous letter." Damon blinked. "It wasn't me, I mean. I would've, but I didn't either." Whoever had written the letter had told the foundation about Eliza's strength, her courage, and the 5 children who never let the absence of a father stop them from dreaming big. A week later, a small camera crew arrived. Eliza agreed, but only under one condition: no filters, no script, just truth. The kids were naturals. Jonah spoke about his love for stars. Maya talked about believing in people, even when they let you down. Leela shared her favorite bedtime story, about kindness. Eli described how he learned to forgive. And Caleb, the smallest, simply said, "I like when Daddy's here. He makes pancakes funny." The footage moved everyone on set. Even the director, a man who had done dozens of these shoots, wiped his eyes more than once. But the camera also caught something unexpected. Moments between Damon and Eliza, not staged, not dramatic, just small glances, quiet conversations. A shared look when the kids said something wise beyond their years. Moments where 2 people who once had a future seemed to be building one again. After the crew left, and the cameras were gone, Damon found himself back on the porch beside Eliza. It had become their place, their quiet corner of reflection. "They asked if we were still together," she said, sipping her tea. "What did you say?" he asked. "I told them, we're still writing our story," he exhaled slowly. "I like that answer." The days that followed were filled with more tiny miracles. Maya's dance recital, Eli winning a chess match, Leela learning to ride her bike without training wheels and screaming, "I did it," so loud the whole neighborhood clapped on. In every one of those moments, Damon was there. Until one phone call threatened to pull him away again. A board member from his old company wanted him back. The CEO after him had been caught in a scandal. They needed someone they could trust, someone to fix things. They offered him his old position with full control. It was tempting, the money, the power, the return of the Damon Rivers brand, but this time, he didn't say yes right away. He thought about the children, the bedtime stories, the school runs, the way Caleb clung to him in the morning, refusing to let go of his leg until Damon promised he'd be back for dinner. He thought about Elisa. He sat down with her that evening, the offer letter open in his hands. "I could go back," he said, "but I don't know if I want to." Eliza looked at him, her face unreadable. "Why not?" "Because the man who left to chase all of that was empty inside, and I'm just now starting to feel full." He waited for her to respond, but instead of advice, she asked him something he wasn't expecting. What would make the kids proud? He didn't answer right away. He stared at the letter again, then folded it and set it aside. "Their dad," he whispered. "Not a CEO, not a millionaire, just their dad." Eliza's hand reached across the table and gently touched his. For the first time since he came back, she didn't pull away. He didn't take the job. Instead, he started a small company from home. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy. He hired young parents who needed flexibility. Built a business that cared more about people than profits. He called it Foundations First, because he knew now that without family, everything else collapsed. The children began drawing him into their dreams. Jonah's plans for a rocket, Maya's idea for a kindness club, Eli's dream of becoming a teacher. Every night at dinner, they would share their goals. And Damon would listen like they were pitching million-dollar ideas. Because to him, they were worth more than gold. One night, after the kids had gone to sleep, Damon found a box in the attic. It was full of things from his early days with Eli's old letters, photos, notes, scribbled on napkins. One note stopped him cold. When we get rich, let's not forget what love looks like. It was written in Eliza's handwriting, dated 3 weeks before he walked out. He held it for a long time, staring at the ink. Then he placed it back in the box and went downstairs. Eliza was in the living room, reading. "I found something," he said, handing her the note. She read it slowly, then looked up at him. "You haven't forgotten," she said softly. "I tried," he admitted. "I tried to trade it for something shinier, but nothing was ever worth more than this." She didn't speak for a moment. Then, for the first time in years, she leaned forward and rested her head on his shoulder. And they sat like that. No promises, no pressure. Just quiet peace. Because love, when broken, doesn't come back loud. It returns gently with trust. With time, with 5 little hands holding it together. Asterisk, the wedding was smaller this time. No chandeliers, no magazine, photographers, no models in glittering gowns or 10-tier cakes standing like monuments to wealth. Just one wooden arch wrapped in hand-picked flowers, a backyard strung with fairy lights, and 5 children sitting in the front row each, holding a hand-painted sign that said one word, "Yes, we still believe in love." It wasn't the wedding Damon had once dreamed of. It was better, because this time, the man standing at the altar wasn't chasing an image. He was honoring a journey. The guests weren't VIP or business partners. They were neighbors, teachers, friends, people who had watched this story unfold in real time. People who remembered the girl who raised 5 kids with quiet courage, and the man who had left only to come back and fight every day to earn his way back in. Eliza stood at the top of the short aisle, her dress simple, elegant, glowing in the golden light of late afternoon. There were no diamonds. Just a smile that stopped time. And when she walked toward him, Damon didn't think about the millions he'd once made, or the fame he'd once craved. He only thought about how it felt to finally come home. But before she could reach him, something unexpected happened. Caleb, the youngest, broke from the front row and ran up to Damon, tugging at his hand. "You forgot something," he whispered. Damon knelt, smiling. "What's that, buddy?" Caleb reached into his little pocket and pulled out a ring, a plastic one, bright red, from a cereal box. "I found it in the kitchen. I thought, maybe you could give Mommy this one too, so she knows it's real this time." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth. Damon blinked back tears. He took the ring from Caleb and nodded solemnly. "It's perfect." Caleb returned to his seat, proud, and the ceremony began. There were no rehearsed vows, no elaborate speeches, just truth. Damon turned to Eliza, hands trembling slightly. "I stood once in a room full of people and chose the wrong path. I was blind to what mattered. But life doesn't always give you second chances. And yet, here you are, here we are, and this time, I'm not leaving. This time, I'm not letting go." Eliza's eyes shone as she replied, "You once told me that one day, you'd build something that lasted forever. I thought you meant buildings, but I was wrong. You built them. Our children, this love, this home, and this time, I believe you." The crowd stood, applause, smiles, tears, and behind it all, 5 small hearts clapping louder than anyone. Later that night, as the stars lit up the sky and music floated through the yard, the children danced barefoot on the grass. Damon twirled Lila while Maya showed off a move she'd been practicing for weeks. Eli debated song lyrics with Jonah. Caleb took turns dancing with each guest like a perfect little gentleman. And in a quiet moment, Damon and Eliza stood under the archway, watching it all unfold. "Do you ever think about how different it could have all been?" she asked. "Every day," Damon said. "But I wouldn't trade this version for anything. I used to think I was raising them alone," Eliza said, her voice soft. "But maybe they were raising me too. They saved me," Damon replied. "They gave me a reason to become who I should have been all along." Just then, a voice called from behind, "Speech, speech." It was one of the neighbors, holding a cup of punch. Damon laughed and raised his hands. All right, one short one. The music faded and the crowd gathered close. "I don't have anything prepared," Damon began. "But I'll say this love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper, a second chance, a quiet 'I forgive you.' I spent years building skyscrapers, but nothing I ever built matters more than the heart sitting right there." He pointed to his children, who beamed up at him like they were watching a superhero, and to every person out there who thinks it's too late to change. Too late to fix what you broke, or too late to be the person you once promised to be. Don't give up. You're not finished, you're just getting started. The applause this time was different. It wasn't for wealth. It wasn't for success. It was for redemption. And long after the lights dimmed and the guests went home, Damon stood alone in the quiet backyard, looking at the house, the chalk drawings on the steps, the porch swing, the glow through the windows. This wasn't the life he thought he wanted. It was the life he never knew he needed. He heard footsteps behind him. Eliza wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his back. "Everything all right?" she asked. He turned and kissed her forehead. "More than all right." Inside, 5 children were curled up on a couch, giggling over wedding photos. One of them was holding the plastic ring like it was made of gold. Because to them, it was. And in the end, the millionaire who had once abandoned everything in search of more, found out that everything he ever needed was right here. Love didn't leave. It waited. Quietly. Patiently. Through the storms, through the silence, through the broken promises, and when it returned, it came in a limo with quintuplets, and a woman who never stopped believing in second chances.